Hi, I am Kelly Hilliard-Rausch, Executive and Artistic Director of the Classic Theater of San Antonio. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight for our Classic Theater community conversation, Amplifying Black Female Voices. To give you a little bit of information about tonight, our event will run until 8:30. We're having a facilitated conversation with 4 female panelists, and this is a safe place. So all trolls and their comments will be blocked, removed, and/or hidden. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Cynthia Freeman Gibbs. Cynthia also writes as C.F. Gibbs, is the author of Reasonable Insanity, a Dr. Olivia C. Maxwell novel, and contributing co-author in United Black Writers Association, Writing is Essential. She anticipates the release of 2 additional books in 2020, which includes the sequel to her debut book and a modern-day twist on Jack and the Beanstalk. Cynthia is a native of Lansing, Michigan, and MBA graduate of Florida A&M University, who is enjoying life in San Antonio with her husband. She volunteers her time in service at her church with Delta Sigma Theta sorority and several organizations. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you to the Classic Theater of San Antonio for providing this forum for us to have this community conversation. And thank you to the audience for being here. This is such an important opportunity because I think we all need to examine ourselves and really look at the action that we can take as it relates to equity, justice, and inclusion. And so the voices that you're going to hear tonight from a diverse panel of Black women is going to shed some light on various topics, and they're going to give their insight and let their voices be heard on the different questions that I'm going to ask tonight. So thank you again for being here. Let's meet our panelists. So let's first introduce Linda Nance. Hi, Linda.
Good evening. Thank you.
Welcome. So let me tell you about Linda. She was born and raised and educated in Texas. She earned a bachelor's degree in biology and French, a master's degree in higher education, and another master's degree in education administration. She has been married to Herbert for 50 years, and they have 2 children and 1 grandson. Over the years, she has held many leadership positions in her church and in community service organizations. She has served over 30 years in public education and has been recognized for many different achievements throughout her career. In 2014, Linda retired as a principal, and in retirement, she continues to mentor school leaders by providing her expertise and knowledge. Welcome, Linda. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Deborah Omawale. Hi, Deborah.
Hey, Cynthia, how are you tonight?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Good. So let's tell you a little bit about Deborah. She is a Classic Theater board member and a retired civil servant who relocated to San Antonio to be a close by grandmother to 5 of her 9 grandchildren. Known as a community advocate and a lover of history, she is thrilled to be living out her personal mission statement of leaving a legacy of love and service to family and the community through her current position as the executive director of the San Antonio African American Community Archive Museum. Welcome to the panel, Deborah.
Thank you.
Next, we have Danielle King. Hi, Danielle.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being here. Here's something about Danielle. She is the co-founder of the Renaissance Guild, San Antonio's premier Black theater company, and she is honored to be included in this conversation. She has 25 plus years as a professional actor, singer, and her recent works include Divas of Eastwood, The Return, Newsies, and I know I'm going to butcher these names, but I believe it's Banya and Sonia and Masha and Spike.
Yeah, that was
And
good.
hey.
That was
And
good.
Smokey Joe's Cafe. Her favorite performances are Ragtime, African Folk Tales, Hairspray, Blues for an Alabama Sky, Steel Magnolias, and Ethics Follies. She has won numerous Alamo Theater Arts Council Performance Awards and really enjoys teaching theater to all ages. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce Jasmine Jackson. Hi, Jasmine.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So Jasmine is a multidisciplinary artist with a passion for storytelling. After receiving an Associates of Arts in Theater from Northwest Vista College, she created the Blackbird Collective, an art collective centered around women of color artists in San Antonio's area. Being a child of a service member, traveling abroad, and experiencing a wide range of diverse communities has and continues to shape her creative vision. Along with being a strong advocate for radical self-care, she wants to use her art to encourage Black women to try new forms of self-expression. Jasmine's current forms of expression include, but are not limited to, photography and floral design. So
Yeah.
welcome to the panel, Jasmine.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so as you can see, we have a very diverse panel of women who are here to answer questions and to give you insight on a variety of topics. So let's get to the questions. First question is, as I wait for everyone to show us your beautiful faces again. There we go. All right, first question. As a Black woman, we may look at the world through a different lens compared to how women of other races may look through their lenses. Events that are happening around us and to the Black community shape the way that we move in society. So as a Black woman, what choices have you had to make and how have they defined your life? And I'd like to hear from all four of you. So let's start with Jasmine.
I would say for me, the biggest thing I've had to face was knowing when I was allowed to speak up for myself or the people around me. I feel like a lot of times, whether it was in school or in the workplace or just in the world in general, Black women are looked at as the aggressor, even if you're not being aggressive at all. And I found that even if I would come to people in a respectful tone or in a polite way, there was still some form of silencing that was taking place. So for me, I felt like, yeah, definitely just like understanding when I'm allowed to speak up, when I felt as if someone has done something racist toward me or said something racist towards me, and feeling comfortable doing that without thinking that I'm going to be told to calm down or to be dramatic or any of those things.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great response. Deborah, let's hear from you on that question.
There we go. Even though Jasmine is quite a bit younger than I, our experiences are identical when it comes to that. Working in a world of Anglo men mostly, I really had to determine what to say, when to say it, how I would be received. Even in management in my field, that made it worse. There were about 4% African Americans in my career field. And so to be a manager of mostly Anglo men, it was challenging because you are perceived as something that you're not. If you are assertive, then you are aggressive. Then I also had a personal battle, a book that I read when I was quite young, The Diary of a Slave Girl, really had me at a place where I'm just not going to be the Black woman that is at the master's door waiting for him to decide when he wanted to have his way with me. So there was an extreme personal battle with how I stick up for myself and for my beliefs.
Thank you, Deborah. Linda, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think for me, my choices go back even further than that. My choices go back from being from childhood. A lot of my choices were influenced by my parents. For example, my dad and my mom both told us, my brother and I, that the best way for us to do better, the way out is what they would say was education. So they stressed for us that we go to school, we pay attention, we don't talk back, we listen. Because I went to an all Black, I'm 71, I went to an all Black school. So you did just what you were told to do. You didn't, you just said, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, and no, sir, and that's the way it was. My dad was a janitor. My mom cleaned white folks' houses, took in laundry, and did ironing. And my dad would take us to work with him on the weekends to show us this is not what you want to do. So again, it was education. My mom would take us, I went once with my mom and I knew I can't do this either. So I did the best I could in school. I made A's and B's, graduated second in my class and went to college. Another choice that I made, it was a Black college. That's where we went back in the day. You didn't have a choice of going to Harvard or other places. So all of those things have impacted me and were good choices, because I think that's what they were limited then, much more than they are now. So that was a good choice, going to a small liberal arts college. And the other thing that was impactful for me was my religion, my belief in God, and it still is. So I would say my parents, my education, and my God have been very impactful for me and still are in my life.
All right, thank you. All right, Danielle, what are your thoughts on this question?
Wow. And I enjoyed listening to the other ladies sharing their views as well. My answer is a little bit of almost everything that they said. Being raised by my parents, actually I was raised by my grandmother the majority of the time, and I spent the summers with my father because he lived in California. And so she's right. The way my parents, or the way I was raised, to be respectful, to learn as much as you possibly can. Well, I took my limits on that one right there. Learn as much as you can, go to school. But one of the things that all boiled down to, when I was ready to start pursuing a professional entertainment career and an acting career, and I started looking around to see, okay, what theaters, what houses are available for me to come and use my talents in when I was here in San Antonio. And that would have been that was back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And there weren't that many places that were offering either performances or shows where we could use our talents, or we weren't being used in other productions that were predominantly white, or predominantly white scripts. They weren't using African American talent in those productions as well. And that's one of the whole big reasons why the Renaissance Guild got started in the first place, was to give more people of color opportunity to get on stage, because at that time when we were looking around and we were trying to find some in San Antonio, there weren't any, or there weren't enough. And so that helped us. That had me, Paul Real Jr., Latrell Bright, sit down one day and say, okay, well, we need to start our own theater company, because there's a lot of talent here, but there's there's not a good use of that talent. So even though we were in a situation where there wasn't anything or much, so let me say it like that, there wasn't much that was available for us to go out and take advantage of, we took the other route and we said, okay, let's start creating our own and let's build our own.
Thank you. All of your answers, it just goes to show that sometimes we have to be those trailblazers and pave the way, create new pathways, and take the steps to keep from being underestimated or marginalized. So thank you for all of you sharing on that question. The next question has to do with racism. And there, if you think about it, there are discrepancies when it comes to the perceptions of racism, to the point that it hinders the true understanding of the perceptions and the experiences in the Black community. So Black people, we actually see racism because we are the targets, whereas white people may not see racism because they may be the perpetrators. So if you were to reflect back on your lives and in 2 minutes or less, share with us the first time that you experienced racism, and then also what emotions you remember about that encounter. And instead of me calling on anyone, I still want to hear from all four of you, but you can just jump in, whoever would like to start off. Or I can call on you. Okay, let's start with Linda.
Okay. I think my very first memory of racism, and I just thought about this today because I kind of grew up with it. I grew up, again, in an all-Black community on the side of town, that's the west side of town, you know, and just right across the road were where the white folks live. So what they did what Trump is trying to do. They had a wall, a real wall that separated us from them. It was to keep us out. That's what it was about. So because if the wall was not there, then we could cut through a shortcut to get to the shops. There were the stores and the department stores. So that was a long wall. And I just, I think we just sort of, lived with it. Didn't think about it being racist, but it was definitely racist. It was just so we wouldn't travel over there to their side of town until it was time for us to go to work. My community was built because it's close to an affluent side of town. So that's where the maids and the janitors and those kind of people live. And it was easy for those to come and pick us up that need to be picked up, or us to walk or to ride the bus. So I lived with a wall for all of my life until I went to college and came back and it was gone. So that was a long time.
Wow. Yeah, that's, and you think about a lot of times, it may not be a wall, but it may be train tracks, living on the other side of the tracks. So Danielle, let's hear from you.
Well, my first memory of racism, or being a target of racism, we lived in Seguin, Texas. Actually, we lived outside the city limits of Seguin, Texas, in an area called Capote. And this is back in 1975, 76. And so there were party lines on the telephone because there wasn't enough telephone lines to get everybody their own private line. So our little suburb area belonged to, was on a party line where, everybody answers the phone until the person says, I need to speak to Janie Joe, and then everybody else except Janie Joe would hang up and keep going. Well, one day the phone rang and I ran to the phone and picked it up. At that time, I must have been like 12, 13 years old. Ran and picked it up and said hello. And it was actually just me and another person who had gotten on the phone, and to see who it was. And the next thing I know, my neighbor screamed at me, "Get off the phone, N-word, this call is for me." And at first I was so shocked. I had never heard such language come from somebody that I knew was, number one, my neighbor, and number two, that the neighbor happened to be white because we were the only Black family in that area. And so at first it startled me and it scared me because I did not know why this person is talking to me like this, what was going on. And before I could even say anything, they said, "You heard me, N-word, get off the phone." And so then I, of course, I hung up. And I went and told my mom. I was crying, and I went and told my mom. I'm like, "What's wrong? What did they say that? Blah blah blah." And she sat me down, and we had one of our first deep conversations about racism and about the way people think. But that's my personal story and my first memory of having it being brought to my attention that I did not look like you, and somebody actually used the N-word on me.
Oh, thank you. Jasmine, let's hear from you on this one.
So I think the way I've experienced racism is, there's multiple things. I think for one, like the fact, like my skin tone, I'm light skinned. I'm not as dark as, like, even in my family, my mom is dark and my brother's dark. I turned out really light. So I think just even from that, I've experienced racism differently than people who are darker than me, unfortunately. But within that, I think for me, I've experienced a lot of microaggressions. I don't remember ever blatantly being called like a certain word or anything like that. But for me, it was more of just like getting followed around in stores, especially when my hair was long and I had a big afro. Getting followed around in stores, people asking me if, or people not asking me if they could touch my hair and just like grabbing it. I had one woman when I was working in retail a long time ago. I was working at the cash register. I had my hair out, and this white woman came up and she was about to pay for her clothes, and she reached across the counter, like across the register, grabbed my hair, and then told me it felt like cotton. And that was a big thing for me because growing up, I grew up a military kid and I was actually moving around a lot, like all through elementary, middle school. I lived overseas, and a lot of the times I lived on military bases. So because of that, I think I naturally saw a lot of diversity around me. And because of that, it somehow like protected me from seeing like the real racism. That was not real, that's the wrong word, but more aggressive forms of racism. Because my mom is from Alabama, her family's from Alabama, so I knew the stories, I knew how racism worked, the segregation, everything about it, but I don't think I actually started to experience racism until I moved back from high school and I started like working and just being out in the world and having people follow me around and touch my hair or like, you know, hold their purse while they're walking next to me, just little micro things that people don't necessarily see, but that of course, like you said, Cynthia, like we see because it's directed towards us, like we're the ones who are supposed to see it and experience it. So yeah, there's a couple different ways of which I've experienced it, but I think that was my first time just realizing what racism really, really was, essentially.
Thank you. Deborah.
Ooh, so I am my mother's only child, and she was her father's only daughter. And my mother was raised in Selma, Alabama. And for all of us daddy's girls on the call, we know that that was a close relationship. So we lived in Columbus, Ohio, and my parents would make that trek to Selma, Alabama several times a year, probably 4 or 5, because my mother wanted to go see her dad, right? So I recall my mother crying 3 times in her lifetime. And the first time I recall her crying, I was probably about 4 years old. My grandmother she worked at a cleaner's in between Broadway and Main Street in Selma, Alabama, in an alley. between Broadway and Main Street. So Broadway was where all the Black businesses were, and Main Street was just that, Main Street, USA. My mother had to go get stockings. And my mother walked fast, she was tall, it was hot like it is here, which is very different in Columbus, Ohio. So we were walking from Broadway over to the department store so she could get stockings. By the time we got there, I was hot, I was sweating. My mother had long legs, I'm running to keep up with her, and I asked her if I could have some water. And she directed me to the ceramic water fountain on Main Street. And I said, no, that water is hot. I don't want that water. I want the refrigerated water. My mother looked and tears welled up in her eyes. And she said, come on, let's go. We hurried, and I didn't even understand what was wrong. I did not get the water, but we hurried back to my grandmother's shop, and I got a big glass of ice water, and I sat up there next to Grandmommy's sewing machine, and I was just as happy as I could be. Meanwhile, my mother had disappeared, and I didn't realize until probably 3 or 4 years later that the reason why I couldn't drink out of that water fountain was because it was for whites only. And my mother did not know how to tell her little girl, her precarious little girl, that no, you can't drink out of that. This is not Ohio. This is Alabama. And that water fountain, that water is not for you.
You know, as I listened to each of your stories and, you know, even thinking about that each of these, all of you lived in different parts of the country. I was in Michigan and had my own experience. And so it just shows that this is something that is embedded in our country. And the emotions that, as you each were speaking, I could feel the emotion from those moments. So it shows us that it cuts to the core when you have that first experience. And it's something that we wish didn't exist now. You hear conversations about people wanting to be anti-racist because no one likes to be called a racist. So now it's, how do you become anti-racist? But now I'd like to look at, well, what's going on today? And so Linda, if you could share with us what has been your most recent experience with racism.
My most recent experience was a few years ago. I think at the time, I didn't think it was racist. I think the implication was there now that I think about it. As I said, I'm a retired principal. And here in San Antonio, most of the Black principals are on the east side. That's just kind of the way it is. You know, the ones in the SAISD, let me say that, let me be more specific because we have so many school districts here. So I was at a meeting because I had one of my teachers who was going through a program, and she wants to be an administrator. So I was her mentor, and I had this other Black administrator. She wasn't a principal at the time, but she came to me and she said, Linda, tell me how you got to be a principal in a school that's not on the east side. And her tone was, evidently I must know somebody, or I was kissing up to somebody, you know, to get to where I was. So those who know me, I try to be tactful as much as I can. And hopefully I was, but I was upset. What I told her was that pretty much I'm good at what I do. And I got to where I am on my merits and no other reason. But she was implying that, I need to be on the east side where all the other Black principals were. So sometimes we hurt ourselves. Sometimes we hurt each other. We may not be doing it on purpose, and sometimes we may be, but she thought I was out of place. I was an uppity, So that kind of bothered me.
Oh, yes. You know, again, going back to where people underestimate and undervalue what you bring to the table, and then it can be systemic where we begin to believe what others put upon us. But in this case, you had to set the record straight. All right, Jasmine, let's hear from you on that question.
So the most recent form of racism that I've experienced, I would say it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about being silenced as a Black woman within like your workspace. And so essentially what happened was the company I was working for was doing something they should not have been doing. And it had been brought to the attention of myself and also my other coworkers. And was one of the few, like 1 or 2 Black people that worked at that company. And so I decided to, like I said earlier, being very aware, hyper aware of how people perceive you as a Black woman, I decided to address my bosses and my managers. And so I went to them extremely calmly, lowered my voice, you know, the checklist of everything that you need to do to make sure your words are being heard and people aren't automatically like assuming that you have an attitude or whatever. So I went to them, addressed the problem, and it was initially met with just like, well, you need to calm down, or you sound like you're getting really excited. Maybe we should just take a break and revisit this. And the whole time I'm just sitting here like, I don't know how I could have come to you any more respectfully or any more calmly while still saying what I felt needed to be said. And so in the moment, I was just like, okay, well, I'm not excited. I don't know what about my demeanor or my tone would make you think that I was being aggressive or rude, but I actually came to you very respectfully. So I feel like you telling me to calm down isn't really like helping the situation. And essentially like the conversation ended. There wasn't much like rebuttal to that, but I just remember like leaving the area where it happened and just kind of like going to the bathroom and like tearing up, not because I thought anything was my fault, but because it's like, it's so frustrating when like you're so hyper aware of how you're being perceived, and when you do everything that you think you need to do to not be perceived that way and you're still perceived that way, it's just like, well, maybe I should just like be quiet then, which I will never do, but it's just the thought that comes to your mind, and that could be very frustrating, extremely. So that was just, yeah, being silenced was the most recent racist experience I've had.
As you were talking about your experience, it just, again, it resonates with me because I've had those same experiences, and it's almost as if as Black women that people are intimidated in hearing our voices, and where we may feel like we have to silence ourselves or change our emotions. And, you know, we have a way that we are supposed to be in one setting and act differently in another setting. So it's just, it's part of our reality, and we have to figure out how do we move in this space so that our voices are heard. And that leads right into my next question, where people often don't realize the power of one voice, especially when it comes to being a catalyst for change. And when you think about amplifying Black female voices, how are you using your voice in order to be heard? So Deborah, let's start with you on that question.
Thanks, Cynthia. So after 27 years of working in a workplace where I had to really dance with when I would be heard and when not, I decided to retire. Said I just don't want to do that dance anymore. And here in San Antonio, I have lent my voice to boards and commissions. I serve on a city commission. I serve on a couple of boards. I also am a community advocate. I still do a dance in that I want to make sure I'm heard, but when I walk in the room, I let it be known I am here to represent Black people. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you don't want to hear my voice, then I'm not the person that needs to be here. And that has been, it's been received. I don't know if it's been received well, but it has been received. And people understand that when Deborah shows up, she is going to speak on behalf of her people.
I love that. And I love you speaking on behalf of your people. All right, Danielle, let's hear from you.
Wow. Well, just talking after her is enough for me to be excited. But what I try to do is I try to make sure that I listen, first of all. I listen to people when they talk to make sure that we're having the same conversation. Because sometimes you would not believe this. They're not having the same conversation that you think you are. And then things go awry and you're like, well, how did we get here? So I try to be very pointed. I listen to what they have to say, and I give myself that opportunity too. Okay, now it's my turn to talk. Now you listen to what I say, and let's make sure we're still on the same track. So I try to be patient. I'm sorry, let me put in a shorter word. I try to be patient, and I try to listen to make sure that I don't miss anything. And that if I think they missed something, I will bring it to their attention as well and say, hey, a minute ago when you said this, what did you really mean? So I try to be patient and understanding and take my time. I also try to be as supportive as I possibly can to other of my sisters and brothers who are trying to get some work done. I think is so important, is that we still need to continue to support each other and what each other is doing, even if you're not, a service person, or even if you don't come from the same background, you still should be supportive and listen and help as much as possible whenever you can, because that is what is really needed right now. Not a lot of division and separation and, okay, y'all go over there in that corner and you do y'all's thing. No. We're all going to sit right here in this one big old pile, and we're going to discuss stuff that we need to discuss so we can get things done. So I think being supportive of each other is very important, and to listen. And when you hear something that doesn't sound right, say something or bring it to their attention. Excuse me, let me make sure I understand what you said. That's the right way to do it. That's polite. And make sure that we're all on the same page so that we don't have miscommunications and things like that going on.
Very good. Thank you, Danielle. Okay, now I'd like to bring up a topic that all of us are very much aware of as it relates to police brutality. And I'll start off by saying that no one should ever be a victim of excessive force. No one. However, we know that Black people are disproportionately the victims of police brutality. And we all saw this in lifetime as we watched the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. And this ignited communities all across the country and even around the world. And even though this is not the first time that we've seen Black men, Black people be the victims of police brutality, but something about this really resonated with so many people that protests have taken place real time that many of us have never experienced. We're seeing new allies emerge where people are reaching out. They want to understand, they want to partner to take action. We see symbols of hatred, Confederate flags and Confederate statues being removed. And also conversations like this taking place where we get a chance to hear from each other. So in thinking about those things, my question is all of this just a reaction to recent events? Or is it truly a cultural change or shift? And will it last? Is this all going to last? So, Jasmine, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a little bit of both. I would definitely have to say that it's a little bit of both. And I think it depends on, for one, like who you choose to surround yourself with. Because I think on social media, there's a lot of performative allyship, I would say. What I mean by that is, I think a lot of people in general, but specifically a lot of white people, are more concerned with being on the right side of history than they are interested in actual social reform and social change and the sacrifices that come along with that. And then on the other hand, I've also seen a lot of my friends, non-Black friends, who are actively speaking out, and not just speaking out or making posts, but are actively protesting, are actively contacting their government officials, and are actually dedicated to trying to show me that my Black life matters and not just say it or post it. So I think there are some people who probably are just, it's sad, but it's kind of the trendy thing to be doing right now, especially on social media, which is totally like my generation. So I see a lot of that. But I've been lucky enough to surround myself with non-Black people and Black people who actually care about me and not just my life, but Black lives in general, who are actually trying to create social change and economic change, and to create equity and just more of the change that we need for sure.
Thank you. Let's hear from Danielle and then Deborah on the same question, please.
Do I think it's an actual cultural shift? I pray that it is, because it's definitely needed. And when we say is it gonna last, it's gonna last as long as we let it last. So I think it's also gonna be up to us to make sure that we don't just stop here and now, and that we just don't just stop at the George Floyd case. We have to keep going. We have to keep moving. We have to keep educating people, or actually, we have to help re-educate people on what the value of life is. A lot of people who have the ideas about racism and all of these things and all these beliefs that I'm better than you, they get a lot of that information while they're sitting on the knee of their mom or their dad, and it's passed on from generation to generation to generation. Now, everybody knows whatever your mama says or whatever your daddy says, it goes. That is it. That's the truth. So nobody wouldn't ever think that their parents are going to lie to them or mislead them. But in a lot of ways, some people are. For whatever the reason is, they are. So I think it has to do with us saying, yes, all lives matter. They do. Black lives matter now, because Black lives are the ones that are getting snuffed out as much or more than anybody else right now. So I do hope and I do pray that we will continue to march forward to demand change. And that's going to have to happen too. You have to demand change. Yes, just because we did it like that 100 years ago doesn't mean that it makes sense to do it like that now. And I think that we have to keep going. We have to keep pressing. We as African Americans need to continue to educate our children about life and about how to go forward and about how to teach your children when they get to that age, and remind them of the history that we have had to go through to get to this point. So yes, I am praying every night that it's not just a cultural change, and it's not just, I don't want this to be just a cultural change here in the United States of America. It needs to be global, and it has reached that point, but we need to continue that all the way through. And don't stop, don't stop, don't get tired. And that's hard to say. Don't get tired, because this has been our life since we got here. But don't get tired and don't stop, and continue to press through so that we can finish it this time. It started in the 60s. We started some change in the 60s and maybe in the late 50s. Yeah, but we didn't finish. So now we need to go through, and all of us working together, we need to complete the journey this time.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, I really hope it is. It is certainly up. I hope it's a permanent change, not just the flavor of the day. It is up to us for our voices to be continually heard. Just like George Floyd's voice was heard around the world, calling for his mother. We have to be that voice to say, no, this is enough. Enough already, we're tired. And it's tiring being that voice. As Danielle said, we have to listen. We have to understand when to speak, and we have to remind our friends, we don't live in a bubble. We all have white friends. We have to perhaps put them on blast, as the kids would say, okay, what have you done today to ensure that your friends know that Black Lives Matter? Because we do it every day. We have to tell our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors that they matter. Because if we don't, then we're leaving it up to people that don't care about them to say they matter. So it's really up to us to keep it going, and we just have to.
All right, thank you to all of you for those answers. Moving on to the next question. Say her name. Say her name. Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Sandra Bland, Pamela Turner, Corinne Gaines. The list goes on and on with the names of Black women who you may not have maybe even heard their names before. But all of these women had their lives taken at the hands of the police. And yet it didn't get the same kind of media attention, and there was no large public outcry. Breonna Taylor, just recently, we started hearing about what was going on in Louisville after we heard about what happened to Ahmaud in Georgia. So, as we think about Black women, we have vanishing Black women. There's a lot of Black women who have disappeared and no one knows what's happened to them because they're not highlighted on the news like Natalie Holloway. And not to downplay anyone who goes missing, but why is it that we just don't hear about Black women when it comes to violence? And it's almost as if there's silence and complacency as it relates to us. So my question is, why are Black women and girls still an afterthought? And how can we make sure that Black women are not forgotten in our quest for justice? So for this question, let's hear from Linda first, and then from Jasmine.
Okay, that's a very, very powerful question. And it's one that I have thought about quite a bit, to be frank with you, on my mind. Why Black people are second-class citizens sometimes. It seems like Black women are third-class citizens, if that's possible. I think, as was said last night when we were doing our little dress rehearsal, it goes back to slavery times. Because, you know, during that time, Black women, you know, they were producing other slaves. They were misused by the master, the overseer of the land, anybody, and everybody, and nobody said a word. Their babies were taken away from them. You know, they were raising the white women's babies. You know, they were nursing them. All those kinds of things. You know, it was almost like they were invisible. You know, this is something that I can use as any way I see fit. So I think that's one of the reasons. I think it's systemic. It's been going on for a long, long time, just in a different version. Now, you know, with the media, you still don't hear about it until something happens, like with Floyd. Then they'll say her name. I think one of the things that we have to think about doing, you know, I said I'm an educator. One of the things I used to tell my teachers, I call it VQ. And this had to do with them being where they need to be, you know, kids were transitioning or being on duty. So I called it being visible, vocal, and vigilant. And I think the same thing can be applied here as well. I think in being visible, you can be visible by letting people know how you feel, writing letters, you know, joining a campaign, doing something that makes you visible. Vocal, having a conversation, just like we're doing tonight, you know, talking to people. Like someone said, you know, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Let me listen first and make sure we're all saying the same thing, or that you understand where I'm coming from. I saw something on Trevor Noah the other night, I think it was. He was talking to some Black young people, and I heard a young man said, I speak 2 languages. I speak English and I speak white folks. So, and what that means is that there are times that you have to play the part. You have to play the part, as we have said tonight. So figure out how you can be vocal. And then you need to be vigilant. You know what's going on. You know what's going on around you. Surround yourself with people who are trying to do the same things you're doing. You know, that's how you know what's going on. You know, just don't take things people say just because you see it on the internet don't mean it's true. You know, do your own research. So I think that in order for things to change, you do have to be visible, vocal, and vigilant. I think that would help.
I think Ms. Linda said it perfectly. And when I first read this question, I was like, wow, that's a great question. I don't think I know a response for that. But when I sat down and thought about it, my mind went on the same track of, you know, when you go all the way back to slavery, like Linda said, Black women were used as a means for production. So their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences were never even considered, much less validated in any form. And I think, unfortunately, the trauma of that has been perpetuated. And also, I think that Black women face 2 different things, because on one hand, you're Black, so you face racism. And then on the other hand, you're a woman and you face sexism and misogyny. And Black women were left out of the women's movement because of racism. And so it's kind of, you end up feeling like you're the lowest on the totem pole. And I think the best way to counteract that is like Linda was saying, is to listen. I feel like the experiences of Black women aren't listened to. I think a lot of times we're perceived to be a lot more strong and more vigilant than than we should have to be. And so I would say, just when a Black woman is trying to share her experience with you, or if she's speaking up and saying like, hey, that felt racist, or hey, maybe you shouldn't say that. A lot of times when I say stuff like that, for some reason I get like, there's rebuttal. And it's like, well, what I'm telling you isn't up for debate. Like, I'm telling you what I experienced. And so you can either listen or we cannot have this conversation, but you are never going to see the world from my perspective unless you listen. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Linda and Jasmine. And I really like the being visible, vocal, vigilant, and listening. And, you know, and as we think about what other Black women are experiencing when they don't have a voice, we as a sisterhood, sometimes we have to be that voice for them and make sure that we're speaking up. So when there is violence against Black women, when Black women are missing, to make sure that we are using our platform in order to make sure that people hear and take action. So we have two grandmothers on our panel. And so my question for both Linda and Deborah are, how do you counsel your children or grandchildren, if you've had those conversations, about how they should deal with interacting with the police, since we're on this this track about talking about the police at this point? And Linda.
Okay, I'll start. We have a son. He is he's grown now, but he graduated from high school in '96, and he wanted to major in music. So he went to University of North Texas at the time. That was had a very good music program. I don't know whether they do or not, but they at that time they did. So we had sort of been having, you know, we call it the talk. So we've been having the talk, you know, probably pretty much all his life, and when something happens, you know, as to try to explain it. But you know, University of North Texas is in Denton, and that's for those non-Texans, that's Klan country. So we told our son, because he made the drive up there first by himself. I can't remember why that happened, but he did. We bought him a used Volvo, and bought him, back then, you know, cell phones looked like looked like a book or something. They were when they first came out here, they were huge. So we bought him one of those and told him, said, now look, son, and he's tall. He's a tall young man. Said, now look, you're probably gonna be pulled over by the police. So, just remember that you don't talk back. You say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. You do whatever they tell you to do, and you call us. That's what you do, because I want you to come back. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. Now, that was in 1996. I have a 9-year-old grandson, and this is 2020. And it looks like his mom and us are gonna have to have the same conversation with him. And to me, that's scary. From 1996 to 2020, I still have to have the talk with my child, you know, and we do it with girls too. But again, I think the young men are the ones who are subject to being harassed more so than the young ladies. So I pray every night. I pray every night that things will get better. But I do think, going back to that previous question, I do think that it is a movement, and hopefully things will go on. It's just not a moment, but things will go on and change. Because one of the differences now between in the 60s and now, we've got it's worldwide. We've got more people involved. It's more diverse than what it was back in the day, as they say.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, Deborah.
Okay, so I have two sons. One is 43, I guess, 43. And he's 6'3" and weighs 300 pounds or so. And he has one son. And then my youngest son is 6'7", and he will be 41. And he has four sons. So I had the conversation with them a very long time ago when they first started driving. But even before that, my dad and their dad had the conversations with them by when they were pulled over by police. Okay, watch. This is how you act. You put your hands on the steering wheel or on the dashboard, and you say yes, sir, and no, sir, and whatever the officer says, you agree with. End of story. Well, fast forwarding, two of my younger grandsons were attending an all-white school, and the eldest of this set had a problem at school in the first grade. He could not play with the only other Black child in his grade because they played too aggressive with each other. So they were put on notice, and he was extremely confused. Well, my son said, Mom, I didn't tell you about this at first because I know you'd be in Atlanta. And he was so right. I'm like, wait, what? And so because of this started happening, and then other things happened that damaged his confidence. And so my grandson's confidence. So we just had to keep telling him, you know, just say yes, ma'am, to your teacher. Just say yes, ma'am. She's going to, right, at this point, we can't change how she feels about you. So just say yes, ma'am. And the same with the administrators. We actually ended up removing him from that school, but he's back now. We put him in a school that was a little bit more diverse so he could get his confidence, because he was just known as a troublemaker, which he was so not. And I am not saying that because I am the grandmother that thinks my grandchildren are amazing. No, I call it like it is. But he was not a troublemaker. My sons are the type of men that, as big as they are, yes, people walk by them and grab their purse and all that stuff. My youngest son is a CPO at a large private equity firm, and my oldest son is a worship leader at a very diverse church. If the last person you can be afraid of them taking your purse is my sons. They will run after the perpetrator. They will say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to you. So, and that's how they raise their children. So it's just been a struggle. And I have to go back to George Floyd, being a mom of two Black men, to hear him, he called for his mother. That's it. I don't have anything else to say, Cynthia.
It's hard to say anything after that because it's heartbreaking, and it's our reality that as mothers, as wives, sisters, daughters of, where we are afraid for what's going to happen if there is this encounter. And to the point that, just hearing both of you say, having the conversation, that's become a part of our language. and a part of the way that we move in society now, that we have the conversation. And it's a necessity in order to survive in the world that we live in. So, so that leads to my next question for Danielle, and then Jasmine, and also Deborah. Are there two Americas?
Wow. Well, hypothermically, there's possibly 3 or 4 Americas. Because racism isn't just limited to just one race. If it was, the world would even be a better place to live. I promise you. If it was all limited to just one race, we'd be okay. But it's not, and it's not just people who look like us. It's our Hispanic brothers and sisters that are closer to us. I'm saying that because some of them was here before we were. So I think, yes, there is a division. There is a division, and there's more than one America. And there's more than one class of people who are being mistreated because of the color of the skin or their nationality or their culture or where they came from or where they were born. Yes, I do think that is very true. Is there any way to get it all equal and even? I don't know about that either. But what I do know is that we need to bring all of us closer together so we can understand each other, so we can talk to each other, so we can know each other's histories. That is important as well, is us knowing their history, just like they need to know ours. Because I think there's a big difference in, do you know the African American history? Do you know where we came from and how we came to be here and all of the rights and struggles that have come because of that? So I think it's very important that we all know each other's histories as well. But oh yes, there's more than one America.
My answer is very similar to Danny's. I think when we say, is there two Americas, that's saying like, is there this or is there this? And I don't think it's just two. I think there's this and this and this and this and this. And that's why it's important to listen and to check your ego and to hold space for other people's experiences. And that goes for everyone, myself included. I think a lot of times we can get so caught up in what we have going on that we forget that there are a lot of different people and there are a lot of different cultures, and it's important to not only hold space for Black people, but for the other people of color who are marginalized by this oppressive society that we have. But I think it goes back to listening to people and to understand that when people are expressing something that they've experienced to you, that it's not your room to question it or to not believe them, but just to sit there and to listen and to also just to be observant. I feel like there's so much happening in the world around you every day, like when you just walk outside, when you go to the grocery store. And so it gets kind of frustrating, especially when you hear white people or non-Black people say like, oh, well, I didn't realize that, or I've never seen that. And it's like, well, you've never seen it because you're not trained to see it. Like the world has catered to you, so you're not going to recognize that. But if we were here and present and able to just look around, you would see these little minor microaggressions that are happening around you to people around you. But it's not just enough to observe them. Like you have to observe them in order to know that they're there, but it's taking it a step further and speaking up and saying like, oh, hey, like I see you just did that, or I see you just said that to that person. Let me tell you why you shouldn't do that, or let me tell you why you shouldn't say that. And I think that's something that's important for like white people who do consider themselves to be allies to the Black community, a lot of the Black people in your community and a lot of the people of color in your community are really tired, is the reality of consistently having to stand up for yourself. Like, although we all continue to do it because it's necessary and we have to, it can be a very exhausting, it can be just exhausting every day to not only experience it in the real world, but to hear about it on the news and to hear about it on social media. So I think, yeah, there are multiple Americas, but it's important that we hold space and listen and to act and to speak out when we see that there's something not right in whatever situation that we're in.
I agree with Danielle and Jasmine. There are multiple Americas. We all have a story. And I think when we hold that space and listen to each other's story, we will learn that we have so much more in common than we have different. I think that's one of the reasons why George Floyd's murder resonated with so many people. One, we were sitting at home, we couldn't go anywhere. And so we saw it, we could not escape it. But so many people, I think, saw this is a man. If he was an animal, a dog, the outcry would have been instant because of how people feel about their pets and their animals. But okay, I'm sorry, I digress. Let me bring it back. So we all have a story, and we have to listen and be willing to share the story. That is our history. We have to understand that we have so much more in common than we have different. And it needs to be the real story, though, not the fairy tale. It has to be the real deal.
So thank you for all of your responses. Deborah, I'm going to stick with you, though, with this next question, because you mentioned the fairy tale. And I know that you are a lover of history. And so my question to you is, how is history being recorded? And is it being captured accurately?
No, it's not being captured accurately. And to my fellow Texans on the call, we'll start at the Battle of the Alamo. Slavery was abolished in Mexico in the 1820s. What you don't hear in your history book is that part of the freedoms that Davy Crockett and the defenders of the Alamo were fighting for was the freedom to be slaveholders. What you don't hear in the history book is that Santa Anna had more Africans, descendants, fighting with him than you would think. But again, the fight was a lot about the ability to hold slaves. What you hear is San Antonio was the first city, one of the first cities in the state of Texas to desegregate their school system. Well, that's not really true, because how many school systems do we have? We have 16 maybe? Why do we have that many school districts? Yeah, just think about that. I could go, oh, and that's, I'm sorry, desegregate the school system after Brown versus the Board of Education. If you look at redlining, and I was doing some research on Baptist Settlement, which was there prior, it was torn down to build Hemisphere, and Victoria Courts. So when it wasn't HUD at the time, it was, the agency was called something else. But anyway, when they built Victoria Courts and Wheatley Courts and the ones on the west side, Alazan, I think is what it's called. There's two over on the west side. My husband he grew up in Lincoln Courts, and he said that they were told that it was built for the families going to Lackland, the military families at Lackland. That is what they were told. Well, it is as plain as day in history that Victoria Courts were built for the white people in the 40s. It says Lincoln and Wheatley Courts were built for the Black people. And the two housing projects on the west side were built for the Mexicans. Let's just keep it real. So I could go on and on and on and on. But that is the thing. We need to know the story, the real story, not the fairy tale. Because when we uncover all those layers, then we can be more empathetic to our stories. We know about the Texas Black codes as Black people, but do you know that there were also Texas Brown codes, as Danielle said, for our Brown brothers and sisters? See, but yeah, I could go on, but I'll just stop there. I'll stop there.
That's it, that I love what you're speaking to, because if we don't know our history, we will tend to go back to repeating certain things in life. And so it's important to learn and to make sure that we're not written out of the history books, which is something that they're attempting to do, making it seem like slavery didn't really happen, and that it was a choice to take a cruise over here from Africa and had jobs instantly available, versus it being that we were forced into slavery. And it was slavery. This was not a choice. So I could go on and on too. But in lieu of time, Radio Hall of Fame talk host Joe Madison, who's also known as the Black Eagle, has often said that the difference between a moment and a movement is sacrifice. And so at this time, as we look at mass actions, is this just a moment, or is it a movement? And I know, Linda, you touched on it a little bit earlier, and I'd like for you to expand on that. And then Danielle, if you could also speak to this question.
Okay, I do think that it is a moment that is turning into a movement. I think that there are a lot of factors that is allowing it to be of movement. I think one of the things is because we have so many platforms, so many devices that that things travel. Back in the 60s, we had to wait for the 6 o'clock news to see what was going on. In the movement. We had everything was delayed. But now everything is instant. The fact that this policeman had his knee on George Floyd's neck. I mean, it was instant. We saw it over and over and over again, not just here, but across the world. And as we said tonight, racism is not just with us, because there are a lot of different Americas. It exists. So people are having empathy and feelings. Well, yeah, I know what it is. I know what it's like. I have been the person who has been a victim of racism, or just being slighted. For example, I was the last one hired, so I was the first one fired for no other reason but that. So I understand that. I'm a woman. I understand being a second or third class citizens. I think most people who are non-white have had some sort of racism, be it hidden or overt or whatever, And I think this administration that we are seeing has allowed it. He won't speak up, He'll say it's freedom of speech. It may be freedom of speech, but it's still racist, He won't he allows things to happen. He won't take the leadership role. So I do think this moment has moved into a movement, and everyone, or most people, can relate to it. But I think it also goes back to what everybody's been saying too. You know, you have conversations, you need to listen, you know, and understand, make sure we're all on the same page when we're talking. But conversation opens up a lot.
Thank you, Linda.
And I was going to agree with 900% of everything that she just said. I think it has started. It started as a moment, but it's getting larger every day, and it's growing. Even through the coronavirus, even with it raging in the land, people still went to the streets to protest and to lift their voices and to let people know this ain't fair. Whether I have a mask on or not, the man dying by the hands of the police is not fair. And so I think, yes, it's growing into a movement, and it needs to continue to grow. We need to continue to raise our voices. We need to continue to make sure that justice is served on whomever the culprit is. If you take somebody's life for no reason, or even for a good reason, and it's not justified, you need to pay the price, period, point blank. I would want that for anybody, no matter what color you were. If your life was taken from you for a wrong reason, justice needs to be served. So the moment needs to continue to grow into the movement. I do believe it is there, but we cannot stop. We cannot stop. Even through coronavirus, we still have Facebook, and we still have other methods of communication to let people know, I don't support that. That's not right. We have all of this technology now. We really need to use it and still be safe at home, with your mask on, but still let the word be spread. This is not right. And we need to continue to fight this and don't stop. I don't care what kind of peace offering is offered. Go for the whole banana or nothing. But we need to keep going, and we need to keep going, and we need to share the information. Everybody needs to be involved with this. This is not just a Black Lives Matter issue. All lives matter. All lives really do matter. They do. But we're going to start at this level first and make sure it gets done right. But yes, I think it has a powerful opportunity. Not, like again, I said, not only in the United States, but it's global now. We just got to keep going. We got to keep lifting up our voices, and we can't get tired.
Thank you, Linda and Danielle, for answering that question. And you actually provided a call to action. It's hard to believe we've been on this call for about an hour and a half now. And there's been so many thought-provoking responses to all of these questions. And so I'd like to say to our audience, thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you gained something new from this discussion, and that you've had an opportunity to examine yourself, because as you move from this conversation, that's going to be the key, is to look at what can you do to move differently in this space, to bring about equity and justice and inclusion throughout this country and throughout the world. So ask yourself, what can you do? And as I thank Linda, Deborah, Danielle, and Jasmine, I'd like for each of them to now give their suggestions to each of you as to what you can do. Because remember, it doesn't have to be anything grandiose or big. Something small, just doing one small thing can really bring about change. You can be that catalyst for change. So let's start with Jasmine, then Danielle, then Deborah, and then Linda, with them telling you, as I say thank you to all of them, as they tell you what you can do, what their suggestions are. So Jasmine.
I think that there are a few things that we could do to make sure that we are first aware people and educated people. So like I was saying earlier, like if you're a non-Black person or if you're a white person, I would say like for a day, like even if it's just a day, like go outside, go to where you normally go to, the grocery store, wherever, and look around at how the people who don't look like you are being treated. Like just really look around and be present and be observant. And I would say also that a question that gets raised a lot by white people is, well, you know, with everything going on, like, what do I do? How do I help? For one, there's a plethora of resources, whether that's books or articles or podcasts or whatever, and everything is a Google search away. So I would say take the responsibility upon yourself to do research, because it's not Black people's job to convince you that our lives matter. Our lives already matter. They've always mattered, but we're trying to bring attention to the fact that the world doesn't treat us like they do. But also remembering that like donation and your money isn't the only way to help people. There are multiple ways to help people, and there are multiple ways that you can fit into this movement. And what I mean by that is, like, for me personally, like, I don't go protest. Like, I have social anxiety. I don't like being in large groups of people. Like, that's not the way that I am meant to be a part of this movement. But you have to find ways of which that work for you to be involved. So if you're a writer, write. If you make films, then make a film about something, but you have to find which you can bring your own personal talents and gifts to the movement, and to keep it going, because if not, we get burnt out and we get tired and nothing gets accomplished when we're tired. So I'd say just being aware, learning, listening, and figuring out where your place in everything is.
Thank you. Jasmine, let's hear from Danielle.
Wow, she took all of my answers. But if I could just say, just continue to have the conversation. If you can't do anything else, just talk or just listen, and continue to be inquisitive and find out the answers to questions that you didn't even know you need to ask or needed to know about. It takes all of us working together to make this world be the best place possible. All of us working together equally, side by side. And so we've got to keep reaching out to each other. We've got to keep supporting each other. Just like Jasmine says, you don't have to go to a march and everything else like that, but there are other ways for you to reach out and say, what can I do? Even if you don't know what question to ask, that's fine. Just say, hey, what can I do? And then lend your hands to help and to work, so we can work together to get this all taken care of. We have to continue the conversation. We can't put it on pause. We can't even let it stop, not even for coronavirus. No. We have to keep going. We have to keep supporting each other so we can make this world a better place.
I'm going to say ditto, and I'm going to just share a really brief history lesson, really brief, because I know we're running out of time. The Virginia slave codes were written in the 1700s. Part of the Virginia slave codes, if you read them, and I'm going to be like Jasmine, no, go look for it. They're just a Google search away. If you read the Virginia slave codes, you'll see why the evangelicals feel the way they do about Black people. You will also see why our lives don't matter. One of the codes say that if a master kills a slave in doing their duty, providing punishment or whatever, they will not need to, no charges will be brought up against them. that practice is still going on, even though the codes are no longer in being enforced. We've got to know our history. We have to listen. And as Jasmine said so well, just take a day and step back and think about what it feels like to have the genealogy of slavery in your system. That is in our genes. We can't get over it. It is tiring. It is burdensome being Black in America and having to fight every day. We don't stop fighting. If we did, we wouldn't be here. But just consider that I'm a person, just like you're a person. And I'm valuable. My children are valuable. My community is valuable. We matter. We matter. Thank you.
I want to say ditto to what everyone has said on the panel, but I think what I want to end with is to go back to what I said earlier about the VQ, be vocal and be vigilant, and figure out how you can do all three or one of the three. And by all means, vote. Equally important. Thank you all.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists. I am just so full right now from hearing from each of you. And I know what I'm going to do in moving forward. And I just hope that our audience will take those steps and take what you've learned today and don't stop after today with those conversations, but move from the conversation to action. So at this time, thank you again, ladies, and I'll turn things back over to Kelly.
Thank you, Cynthia. And thank you, ladies, for being brave and sharing your stories and doing a lot of heavy lifting. What you did tonight was exhausting in ways so many people can't imagine. We can't imagine. So I appreciate you coming to the table. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you, audience, for listening. And my guess is you might have questions you want to ask these ladies. So we are going to do, I am inviting you now to a follow-up community conversation next Wednesday, the 22nd at 7 p.m. These ladies are willing to take time again out of their lives to answer your questions and be here from anything that they've inspired in you tonight to want to ask about. So please, we'll have an email that goes out, Facebook, website, it'll all be on that. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing, ladies, and I wish you all a good evening.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.